Wendys is letting you win real food with your fantasy teams this year with the Wendys Daily Face-Off Survivor Pool. For those of you who dream of smoking the competition, Wendys is rewarding you with weekly prizes that will have you winning. But here's the big secret to lineups. It's all serendipitous, like Wendy's new limited edition chicken strips and French toast sticks. Sometimes the best teammates are the ones you'd least suspect. Sign up to play Daily Face-Off Survivor Pool to win weekly prizes like the new chicken strips and French toast sticks from Wendy's and the Wendy's app. We're not talking about the game itself because I got eliminated on Tuesday, as did Frank Saravelli, who around these parts we call Daddy Face-Off.
Can we talk about the Peppermint Frosty? Have you had a Peppermint Frosty at Wendy's?
I haven't.
I was excited. Okay. I'll admit, I'm a peppermint guy. Call me Peppermint Patty if you want.
Yeah.
I'm going to stick to chocolate Frosties, so I'm going back.
The chocolate Frosties are just unbeatable. Do you dip fries in them?
I don't.
I do.
But I was excited to try the Peppermint Frosty. I'm just going to say I'm going to stick with chocolate.
Peppermint stuff is so hit or miss for me.
Yeah, I think I'll stick with the Starbucks for my peppermint fix, and Wendy's. Yeah, there are other things on the menu. Just didn't quite hit
chicken strips and French toast sticks.
Right.
Go check it out. Okay. Let's get to this segment, Jeff. This big picture conversation that you and I wanted to have about the Canucks competitive window. Let's establish when the Canucks competitive window is, and B, how are they going to keep that window open for as long as possible?
And I think the second part there is the important one, because anytime you talk about windows, you look at a team like the Washington Capitals, and it took forever for them to figure it out and get it right. And Alex Ovechkin was doing incredible things throughout his career. And it's not about one guy or two players. And even Tampa is an example. I mean, Tampa was a great team for a long time before they finally figured it out and got it right and got their hands on the cup, not once, but twice. So, as I sit here and I look at Elias Pettersson, just turned 25, and Quinn Hughes is 24, it's not that these guys don't have a decade or more in them to be high-level performers and producers. The problem is it's going to get a lot more expensive for both of them on their next deals. So when I look at the composition of this roster, I think they're a little bit ahead of schedule, that their star players this year have all leveled up. Some of the competition around them as well has, just hasn't amounted to much. I thought they'd be in a dogfight with, teams like Nashville and Calgary and St. Louis.
Seattle.
And some of those teams obviously have taken a step back, and, it's allowed the Canucks to emerge here and hang with the big boys. So we know that Elias Pettersson is the front burner issue for the Vancouver Canucks in this big picture conversation. He's getting his. It's just a question of when and ultimately what is that dollar figure, and Filip Hronek's going to be next in line there. So, there are two big contracts to come for the Canucks that complicate this matter in this conversation. But the salary cap's going up. Tyler Myers is coming off the books. They can make the numbers work here for next season and the season after that. That's when it gets crunchy financially. And so, as I look at the way this team is situated, I think they're a little bit ahead of schedule. Can their star players stay at the level they're at? Like, a year ago, people were running Brock Besser out of town. Now we're talking about what's it going to take to re-sign him and what's that dollar figure going to look like. But I think for me, Dave, it really hinges on 2 more years beyond this one of Thatcher Demko at $5 million. This is a goaltender that pitched his 3rd shutout of the season last night. He's the front runner for the Vezina at $5 million for the remainder of this year and 2 more. Like, you are absolutely reaping value out of that contract the way that he's playing. And the expectation is, he just turned 28, so you're going to get him for his 29 and 30-year-old seasons, sort of right in the prime of his career. And then you've got Quinn Hughes on his current contract for a year beyond that. So Demko's going to get a raise, but the Hughes one is really, to me, like, he's on such a value contract. That contract now has turned out to be just a ridiculous deal at $7.85 million. Not going to double on the next contract, but as salaries go up and the cap goes up, like, if he continues to play at this level as a defenseman, controlling the game and doing the things that he does, he's in for a massive raise. And so that's where, Pettersson deal, Hronek's going to get a contract, Demko's going to need a raise, and then you get to Quinn Hughes. All while I think the next 3 years, you can still expect JT Miller to play at a relatively high level. If there's going to be a dip in his production, it's likely to come later in the contract that's kicked in here. So That's the problem. And I think you look at a team like the Toronto Maple Leafs where you have to make decisions. And even Tampa that was through here the other day, they maintain their high-end guys, but the challenge is to fill around them. And that's a skeleton crew compared to some of the players that they had that were part of those championship teams. Alex Killorn chases the money. Andre Palat's no longer there. Yanni Gordy is gone. Ross Colton, so you make these decisions on who to allocate your money to. Well, if Paterson's getting a raise and he's going to get paid what he's worth, and Quinn Hughes ultimately is going to get a raise on his next contract, then it gets dicey because at some point you have to start peeling away players that you think are part of your core group. So I really do think with this group, I would say the next 2 to 3 years are pretty damn important for the Vancouver Canucks.
I wonder how long the window actually stays open. That's the big thing because I think we can all agree, especially with the way this season's gone. It's already December. They are competing now. And Jim Rutherford did a Q&A with our pal Patrick Johnson over at the Province. And he spoke about how, we're trying to compete now. And what he highlighted was keeping that competitive window open in the future. I have the question and the answer here. I wrote about it at Canucks Army, and I want to kind of touch on it again today. He said, you've talked so many times about clearing up the cap, and we can look at where things are next year. Very much is entirely your staff's framework. Do you anticipate the cap still being something you're going to have to think extra about, if you will? That was a question from PJ to Jim Rutherford. And he said, Rutherford, that is, the one area that we're going to have to be aware of is the years 3 and 4 of the OEL buyout. Year 1 and 2 aren't bad. Year 1 is this year. Year 2 is next year. The last 4 years aren't bad, but we have to be a little bit cautious of years 3 and 4. But it seems like if you're going to be competitive and want to contend, you're always going to be up against the cap. You're always going to be walking that tightrope, excuse me. And PJ, next question was, with the players you have and the age they're at, Hughes, Paterson, Miller, you really should be trying to contend, shouldn't you? And he said, correct. But I do feel, and it should fall in line with that year 3 and 4 of OEL's buyout, that if these younger players that we have in the pipeline now, if they get to what we're projecting them to be, that all will fall into place. And we got some good players coming. And then Jeremy Colleton's doing a good job with those young players in Abbotsford. They're developing those players, getting them ready. So I feel confident, but it doesn't always go the way you thought it was going to go. If there's one thing that we learned from the last management regime, it's don't count your chickens. Don't count your eggs. Don't count your chickens. What's the saying?
Yeah, don't count your chickens.
Don't count your chickens before they hatch. You go back and find the old Canucks Reddit posts about, think of what a wagon this team's going to be in 2022. Tyler Madden is going to be on the second line. Adam Gaudette is also going to be on the second line as a winger. You're going to have so much depth. Tony Utenin is going to be playing top pairing minutes. All these crazy takes that we heard, and Faber threw some of those out, and I was like, yeah, go Faber. So you don't want to overhype your prospects too much, but when you look at a team like the Dallas Stars, who we've had in the context of this conversation, we've had the conversation about them, is that they had Thomas Harley and Wyatt Johnson come in on ELCs, and those two were basically enough to be difference makers for them, even with some bad money on the books. With the Canucks getting rid of a lot of their bad money, you have to think that with that OEL buyout, which of course is bad money, that if you're able to get even just 2, maybe even 1 impact player playing either top 4 minutes or top 6 minutes as a forward, that you're going to be able to compete during those years.
Right. So when he talks about some of the players that they've got, Nils Höglander is obviously here, you'd like to think that he turns 23 here in a week's time, that he's going to continue to develop. He looks like he's arrived now as an everyday NHL player. You hope that Vasily Podkolzin is not going to be too far behind. And so, these were relatively high draft picks from 2019 that you want to believe are going to hit their stride and are going to be able to be part of that next layer after the star power. But then also you've got Jonathan Lekkerimäki and you got Willander. This is the importance of, as you said, plugging guys in on ELCs, but not just plugging them in and they play. Like, these were both first rounders, top half of the draft first rounders. You'd like to think that they could be contributors on ELCs. So those kind of players become massively important to any team that's up against the cap. the OEL, those years 3 and 4, I mean, you're looking at essentially that's a $4 million player that you don't have the luxury of having at your disposal. But if you can get two guys from whom you can extract value on their entry level deals, then those guys can go a long way to helping you continue to develop, and they can, support the star power that you've got. I guess the one danger for me in any kind of discussion like this is that, you're the Vancouver Canucks. You're doing all you can to build the best possible team with the players that you've got available to you. And then you put that team up against other teams that are doing the same thing. You're trying to build your team in a vacuum, and the regular season is sort of like all the lectures and the studying you have to do, and the playoffs are the final exam. Well, only one team can win the Stanley Cup, and they're always going to be in a division with Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl. And there's even more urgency on the Oilers and that question about competitive window and making McDavid happy and keeping Draisaitl around, and a guy that talking about a value contract and what they're getting out of Leon Draisaitl. And so, I guess and call me foolish, and people will keep the receipts, I'm sure. But at some point, I do think that the Oilers are going to figure it out, that they're going to get goaltending, that they're going to be able to support McDavid and Draisaitl, or that maybe McDavid and or Draisaitl just go off in a playoff run and put that team absolutely on their back. And so that's the danger, that no matter how good a team the Canucks and other teams build, you're always going to have to go through other good teams to get to the top of the hockey mountain. And so, I think when you have opportunities like they have here over these next couple of years, I don't want to see them continue to build for 5 and 8 years out. Like, at some point, I want it to come together, and I want these guys to step into the ring and take their best swing and see where it leads them. But this is pro sports, and there's ultimately no guarantee that it's going to work out.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, I just want to say about the Oilers, thankfully, they're going to get that goaltender with all the bullets in the chamber and all the great goaltenders they've drafted over the years. Passing on Jesper Wallstedt should have been the end of the Ken Holland era in Edmonton. But I digress. Okay. The thing I want to focus on, Jeff, is I was thinking about this on the way in today into the office, and I'm thinking to myself that, okay, if you're the Canucks, you just laid out Thatcher Demko, you just laid out Quinn Hughes. There's a lot of things to consider here. If the goal is to win a Stanley Cup, which it is, let's not kid ourselves here, right? Yep. The goal needs to be to win a Stanley Cup. Is your best chance at doing that to look at it as a 4, maybe 5-year window that you have, where you're still going to have young players coming through, because presumably you keep your first round pick for this draft? That's the thing that I keep coming back to, is Rutherford's comments that we just spoke about earlier make me think that with this team having their eye on the future while still trying to compete right now, I don't see them trading that first round pick at the deadline for any sort of help. I could be wrong, but I do see them using that first round pick at this year's draft. And what I'm thinking to myself is, next year is a year where you don't have the OEL buyout. You've got all this cap space with Tyler Myers. You're going to be able to sign Philip Rourke. You're going to be able to sign Elias Pettersson. Hell, you might even be able to sign some good players around them as well. In my mind, I'm thinking that next year is the year where you start to go all in, if you will, because that's the year where presumably this team goes on a playoff run this year. I don't want to use the word run loosely. They make the playoffs. They play at least one round of the Stanley Cup playoffs. That experience obviously matters quite a bit to this core. They play around at least one in the NHL playoffs. The next year, you'd want to take a step in the right direction. If your team comes out again and has the start of the year that they did this year, and it's fact at that point that this is the real Canucks, they are a top 10, maybe top 5 team in the league. If they keep that pace, next year is the year for you to go all in. If the goal is to win a cup, that's the year where you move those picks and you start to get those players that are going to be difference makers for your team, moving forward.
I have been firmly in the camp of they've traded too many first rounders here of late. And this is now sort of the time when some of those, like the JT Miller, that trade worked out okay. But at the time, I certainly didn't like the idea of a first rounder. The OEL Connor Garland deal, in theory, those first rounders now would be in their early 20s and would be stepping in and helping this hockey club. And, Connor Garland, as hard as he's working, no bottom line, but, Arizona took Dylan Guenther, who looks like he's going to score a bunch of goals in the National Hockey League for a lot of years. could Dylan Guenther be here now as a younger, cheaper piece and producing at a higher level? He's probably not working at the same rate that Connor Garland is, but at some point that does catch up to you when you're trading all these guys away. That said, and we don't have a crystal ball, but Dave, 30 games into the season, they look like they're going to be picking 27th or 28th or 29th in the first round. And I'm starting to think that, with Jim Rutherford's reputation, and we're starting to see Patrick Allvin, some of that's rubbing off on him. He's being aggressive. He's finding ways to make deals. I am wondering if they look at that and think, we'd be willing to part with a first rounder that's in the, bottom 5 of that first round. The problem there is, if you're making that kind of deal, you're looking for a piece that's going to come in and help you right here, right now. Show me how they make that work on the budget.
Exactly. And that's what I keep coming back to. Excuse me. And I don't know. I don't think you can, which is why I ultimately think, one, they keep that first rounder. But the reason that I say they move it for next year, and next year is the year that you go all in and you start to build your team to be a Stanley Cup contender next year. They're a playoff contender this year. They've built that much, but let's not kid ourselves. The president of the team said, if everything goes right, we're a playoff team. Okay. That doesn't sell me as a guy who's going to move a first round pick to help this team take the next step this year. Get that playoff experience, use your pick and take the next step next year. Because my thought process, Jeff, is that sure, you can extend your window of being a playoff team by, I don't know, you could probably push it to 6 to 10 years if you keep those picks, right? If you keep those picks and you keep replenishing the pipeline, you could push that. But are you going to be a team that's capable of winning a cup if you just, in my mind, all this is pushing is the window of being mediocre, but on the right side of mediocre. They've been on the wrong side of mediocre for the past 10 years, and then moving those picks too early before they had the guys coming in. That was what I think this team did wrong. And obviously the pro scouting was abysmal under the last man regime.
And we saw desperation out of Jim Benning. And that's what the OL trade obviously was at the tail end. And, that one hasn't worked out, and especially with the buyout that's going to be on the books now till 2030. But the JT Miller trade did work out. So the idea that trading a first rounder, you can't win that kind of trade. I mean, I think now, with the benefit of hindsight, most people would say, yeah, we'll do the JT Miller deal again. Absolutely. I just wonder, when Rutherford sat there and we were all there at the Park Hotel just the day before training camp, when he said the thing about if everything goes right, even he couldn't have envisioned Brock Besser having the season.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody in that room that day thought that Quinn Hughes was going to level up the way that he had. This guy had a 76-point season. If he had done that, if you had promised the Canucks that they could lock into Quinn Hughes having a 75-point season for each of the next 10 years, they probably would have said, we'll sign up for that. And then Quinn Hughes comes back and now sitting with 9 goals and has taken his game to another level. I don't think people internally in that organization expected that he was going to be able to do the things that he's done and command games the way that he has. So, has everything gone right for the Canucks since Jim Rutherford said that? No. I mean, Carson Soucy's been injured a couple of times. Ilya Mikheyev wasn't ready for the start of the season. There have been a couple of missteps along the way, but really in the big picture, just about everything, the health, their stars, again, I'll knock on wood for them, the injuries they have had, have not touched the star level. Like when you see a Kyle Connor in Winnipeg going out for 6 to 8 weeks, that's adversity that a team like Winnipeg is going to have to overcome. But the Vancouver Canucks, for the most part right now, their best players have not only been available to them, but they have absolutely lit it up. The power play has been terrific. It has been a game breaker. So they've had a ton of things break their way. And I do wonder if that changes the perspective behind closed doors in some of those corner offices at Rogers Arena. What Jim Rutherford said to Patrick Johnson, and he made the rounds. There was the media blitz from the president this week, and he offered some tidbits and things for us to parse. But I think what he says for public consumption as opposed to what happens in the internal discussions they have there, I do wonder if their timeline has crept up just a little bit, recognizing that when this team is on, that it can pretty much hold its own with just about anybody. So, we'll see. They're 30 games into this. There's still 52 in the regular season then. And of course, then the real games that matter, but they certainly have positioned themselves where they're going to be a playoff team. And then it's a question of, playoffs are so much about matchups. sometimes you run into the best power play in the NHL, or you run into a goalie that's just on an absolute heater. Like, those are the X factors that you can't control. For them, it's just about getting to the playoffs and then sort of assessing the matchup and take their chances from there. But it has been an incredibly wild ride these first 30 games. And yeah, I mean, it's going to be fascinating to see both short-term and long-term for this hockey club.
I have a new take. Do everything you can to win the Stanley Cup this year. Don't care about the competitive window anymore. Just try to win it this year. And that's because we got a contribution in our YouTube live chat from regular listener, Captain Insano. He said, my dad has watched the Canucks lose 2 Stanley Cups, and this will be his last season thanks to cancer. I hope they give everything they got to win the cup this year. So that's my new take for the rest of the year, is do everything you can for Captain Insano's dad to see this team win a Stanley Cup. Our thoughts are with you, Captain Insano.
It's crazy to think, though, now that Edmonton has sort of re-entered the conversation as a team that looks like the team that most of us expected before the season. Just nobody saw them taking this path to get there. But like the way that they're going, I mean, Vegas is the top team in the NHL right now.
Mm-hmm.
Los Angeles Kings have been every bit as impressive as the Canucks have. And the fact that the Canucks don't see the Kings until February 29th is just crazy. Like, they can't measure themselves against the LA Kings for 2 more months. But I mean, you could have 4 teams in the Pacific Division that have legitimate designs on a lengthy playoff run. And that's the problem is, only one of those teams ultimately can scale the mountain higher than the others. So it's setting up to be a dogfight the way that things are going here in the Pacific Division.
I hope that it's a Oilers Canucks matchup in the first round for our friends at Oilers Nation to have to deal with that. I think that'd be a lot of fun.
Social media, like, just to think, like, I mean, the last time the Canucks were in the bubble, it wasn't. I mean, yes, it was, but it wasn't. Like, where Canucks Twitter is now, compared to the last time that they qualified for the playoffs in 2015, and that was Calgary. If they got Edmonton in the opening round,
it'd be
it would be so good.
Oh, it'd be great. Canucks Conversation with Harmon and Quads every weekday at 2 p.m. Be sure to check it out on the Canucks Army YouTube channel. And if you missed it, go check it out on your favorite podcast catcher app.